Before the first cannon fired, before the first casualty, the United States was already at war, philosophically, economically, and morally. The contradiction at the nation's heart was undeniable. A land built on freedom, yet dependent on slavery. The early 1800s saw America expand westward, new territories, new states, and with them, one essential question: would these lands be free or enslaved? While the industrial North surged with factories and urban growth, the agrarian South depended deeply on slave labor to power its cotton economy. Each new compromise, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, delayed the inevitable, like patching holes on a sinking ship. Tensions bled into violence. Bleeding Kansas saw neighbors turn on neighbors over ideology. The Dred Scott decision by the Supreme Court erased hope for many enslaved people by declaring they had no rights a white man was bound to respect. And then came the firebrand, John Brown, who led a raid on Harper's Ferry, attempting to incite a rebellion. Abraham Lincoln's 1860 election was the tipping point. He wasn't even on the ballot in many southern states, yet he won. The South saw this as proof: the Union no longer served them. Scholars still debate whether the war was about states' rights or slavery, but the states that seceded made it crystal clear in their declarations. The right they were defending was the right to own people. In December 1860, South Carolina seceded from the Union. Within weeks, 6 more followed. The Confederate States of America was born, not quietly, not peacefully, but with drums echoing the sounds of division. It began not with a major battle, but a standoff. In April 1861, Confederate forces fired the first shots at Fort Sumter, a federal stronghold in South Carolina. The fort surrendered after 34 hours. The Civil War had officially begun. Lincoln responded by calling for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion. But this move only hardened the South's resolve. 4 more states, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, joined the Confederacy. Suddenly, it was brother against brother. Neither side anticipated the war's length or horror. Many thought it would be over in months. Instead, it dragged for years, fueled by rival economies, ideologies, and stubborn pride. The North had manpower, industry, and railroads. The South had experienced military leaders and the advantage of fighting on familiar ground. Early Confederate victories at First Bull Run and Wilson's Creek gave Southern morale a boost. But the Union adapted. It imposed a naval blockade, choking Southern ports and trade. It seized control of key riverways, dividing the Confederacy. The war strategy wasn't just about battlefield wins, it was about economic strangulation and psychological wear. Meanwhile, soldiers marched not for money or medals, but for causes greater than themselves. Letters from Union boys spoke of preserving the nation. Southern fighters wrote about defending their homes. Back home, families lived in suspense. Mothers buried sons. Wives read casualty lists with trembling hands. Children grew up with the thunder of cannons as a lullaby. Still, the blood kept spilling. As the war raged, one question hung in the air like smoke: was this just a battle to preserve the Union, or was it a reckoning with slavery? By 1862, Lincoln had begun shifting. He understood preserving the Union was vital, but ending slavery could strike at the heart of the Confederacy and redefine the war's purpose. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued on January 1, 1863, didn't immediately free all enslaved people. It only applied to Confederate states. But symbolically, it was thunderclap: the Union now stood officially against slavery. The war became not just political, but moral. Southern leaders called it an act of aggression. Northern abolitionists saw it as justice delayed, but finally moving. Black Americans, enslaved and free, saw it as hope. Over 180,000 black men joined the Union Army. The 54th Massachusetts Regiment became legend, storming Fort Wagner in one of the war's fiercest assaults. They weren't just fighting for victory, they were fighting for dignity, legacy, and a future. Still, the path to equality was steep. Even in Union camps, black soldiers were paid less, treated worse, and often used for labor over combat. But their bravery under fire began to shift perceptions. Slavery was no longer a backdrop, it was the burning center. In July 1863, two armies clashed in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania in a battle that would change everything. Gettysburg was not the war's bloodiest battle, but it was the most decisive. General Robert E. Lee, hoping to deliver a crushing blow in Union territory, faced off against General George Meade. Over 3 days, more than 50,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing. Day 1 saw Confederate momentum. Day 2 brought brutal fighting across Devil's Den and Little Round Top. Day 3 ended with Pickett's charge, a suicidal Confederate advance across open fields. It was slaughter. Gettysburg was the Confederacy's high-water mark, and its turning point. 2 weeks later, Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address. Just 272 words, but it echoed across time. He redefined the war, not as a struggle to preserve the past, but to forge a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. From that moment, the Union's cause carried moral weight that couldn't be ignored. As the Union gained ground, its tactics changed. The war wasn't just about battles, it became a campaign to break the South's spirit. General William Tecumseh Sherman understood this better than anyone. In 1864, he led a force of 60,000 soldiers on a scorched-earth path from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia. Sherman's men destroyed railroads, burned farms, and tore down telegraph lines. They left a trail of ash 300 miles long. It was brutal. It was deliberate. And it worked. Sherman's strategy of total war aimed to make the South too weary to fight. He didn't just target armies, he targeted the infrastructure that kept them going. It was psychological warfare, and it broke the Confederacy's will. Critics called him a monster. Supporters called him a genius. Even today, Sherman's legacy sparks debate. But one thing is certain, after his march, the South was never the same. By 1865, the nation was exhausted. Over 600,000 lives had been lost, more than all other American wars combined up to that point. Battlefield deaths. Disease. Starvation. Prison camps like Andersonville became symbols of the war's brutality. Civilians suffered deeply. Cities like Richmond and Atlanta were reduced to rubble. Orphans roamed streets. Women worked, prayed, and buried the dead. The North struggled with war fatigue, the South with devastation. Yet, through all this, the idea of America endured. Not untouched, not unmarred, but alive. Medical care was primitive. Amputations were often the only option. Women like Clara Barton stepped forward, tending to the wounded and founding what would become the Red Cross. There were moments of grace amid the horror, letters home, hymns sung by firelight, friendships across enemy lines. But the nation had changed. The idealism of 1861 had given way to the grim reality of what unity would truly cost. By early 1865, the Confederacy was collapsing. Union forces pushed deeper south. Lee's army was low on men, food, and morale. On April 2, Richmond, the Confederate capital, fell. Lincoln walked through the city just days later, not as a conqueror, but as a quiet witness to history. A week later, at Appomattox Courthouse, Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant. Grant offered generous terms. Southern soldiers could keep their horses, return home, and begin anew. It was not vengeance. It was a first step toward healing. The war was over. In the North, church bells rang. In the South, silence hung heavy. A chapter closed. But healing a nation would prove harder than winning the war. Just days after victory, the unthinkable happened. On April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer. He died the next morning. The nation wept. Black Americans mourned a leader who had at least tried to see their humanity. White Americans, North and South, were stunned. The man who had guided the Union through its darkest hour was gone. Reconstruction began, but without Lincoln's leadership, it faltered. His successor, Andrew Johnson, lacked vision. Southern states resisted change. The Ku Klux Klan rose from the ashes of defeat. Hard-won freedoms were contested at every turn. Still, the Civil War left its mark. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. The 14th and 15th offered citizenship and voting rights, on paper, at least. The Civil War redefined what the United States meant. Not a loose union of states, but a single nation, indivisible. Not perfect, but striving. Even now, the war echoes, in our politics, our divisions, and our ideals. It wasn't just about slavery. Or states' rights. It was about the soul of a nation, tested by fire, and still, somehow, burning with the hope of a more perfect union. The Civil War was not just a clash of armies, it was a clash of truths. It forced the United States to face its greatest contradiction, the promise of liberty built on the backs of the enslaved. Over 4 years, through fields soaked in blood and cities reduced to ashes, a new nation emerged, scarred, but still standing. But unity came at a price, and healing has never been linear. The ghosts of that war still walk beside us, in race, in politics, in the questions we ask about who we are. Yet even in its darkest hours, the war revealed a capacity for sacrifice, courage, and change. The Civil War did not end the story of America. It redefined it. And it reminds us, progress is painful, justice is hard-won, and freedom, true freedom, is never free.